The old man moved through the silent halls of his ship, his boots making soft sounds against the metal floor. The lights were dim and the walls were scratched from years of use. This ship had seen wars and fires and escapes through burning skies. Now it floated quietly near a dead moon, where no one came anymore. The man called it home, though it felt more like a tomb. His name was Grayson, and he was once a soldier of the Terran forces. Long ago, people cheered for his victories and feared his name. Now there was no one left who even remembered him. He moved like a machine, slow but with purpose. Every morning he woke at the same hour and checked the outer scanners. Every night he sat by the window and watched the stars pass by in silence. The war was over, the galaxy had moved on, but Grayson had not. He lived among old weapons and dusty metals. He never smiled. He rarely spoke. His only companion was the hum of the engines and the cold light of distant stars. One evening, while checking the signal bands, he heard something strange. A broken transmission slipped into his comms. It was weak and cracked like a whisper through a storm. He adjusted the controls and filtered the sound until the message became clear. It was not a request for trade or a pirate threat. It was something worse. A slave transport moving through the edge of the old sectors. Coordinates flashed across the screen. They were heading toward the Black Drift, a system where laws had no meaning and cruelty ruled. The voice in the message was young and scared. It did not cry or beg. It only repeated the same words. "Help us, please someone. Help us." Grayson stared at the screen for a long time. The stars outside blinked in the dark and the moon turned slowly beneath him. His hand rested on the console, but did not move. His breath came slow and heavy. He had heard such voices before. He had ignored them before. Not this time. He stood and walked to the armory. The doors hissed open and revealed rows of old gear. Dust covered the shelves and parts of the floor were stained with oil and dried blood. He reached for his old chest plate, scratched and dented, but still strong. He pulled it over his shoulders and locked it into place. Then he took the plasma rifle from the wall, checked the charge and slung it over his back. His fingers moved with the memory of 1,000 battles. His mind cleared like icy, moved to the pilot seat and powered up the engines. The ship shook gently as it came to life. Systems blinked awake and screens lit the dark room. The engines rumbled like sleeping beasts. Grayson punched in the coordinates from the message and watched the map unfold. The slave ship would reach the drift in a few hours. If he moved now, he could intercept them before they reached the auction stations. His ship was old, but fast. He launched it into the black and watched the stars stretch around him. His eyes stayed on the tracker. His grip tightened on the controls. Memories began to rise in his mind like ghosts. The screams of old battles, the faces of people he could not save, the promises he had made to the dying. One promise returned to him clearer than all the rest. A young soldier once asked him why he fought. Grayson had replied without thinking, "Because if I don't, someone else will suffer." He remembered the face of that soldier. She had died on the field months later. Her voice still echoed in his dreams. He would not let these girls suffer if he could stop it. He would not stay silent again. The ship jumped through a final gate and came out near a drift-in gas cloud. The slave ship was visible now. It moved slow, but steady, its engines glowing faintly in the dark. It looked like a cargo vessel, but its shape told Grayson everything he needed to know. Long central hold, guard pods on either side. No signal beacon. No ID. A shadow ship. Grayson slowed his ship and brought it behind a debris field. He watched the slaver ship from the shadows. The scanner showed 6 life forms in the front section, armed, restless. In the cargo hold, he saw 3 faint signals. Weak but alive, they were not moving much. Probably sedated or locked in small cells. He checked the heat signatures. All alien. No humans on board except him. He powered down his weapons to minimum draw and activated the stealth mode. His ship drifted silently through the dark and circled toward the cargo hatch. He locked onto the outer clamps and released a small magnetic tether. The ship rocked slightly as the tether connected. He climbed into the boarding shaft and drew his sidearm. He moved through the tunnel with quiet steps and reached the hatch. With a code override, he forced the door open and stepped into the enemy vessel. The air inside smelled of rust and oil. The lights flickered. No alarms had triggered. They did not expect company out here. Garen moved through the halls like a shadow. He found the cargo hold sealed with a pressure lock. From the other side, he heard soft breathing. He placed a hand on the door and paused. He spoke through the intercom in a calm voice. "I am not here to hurt you. I am here to get you out there." Was silence. Then a voice answered. It was small and cracked. "Who are you?" Garen replied simply. "Just someone who still gives a damn," he hacked. The door and it hissed open. Inside he saw them for the first time. 3 girls. One with silver skin, glowing eyes. One with scales like glass and long dark hair. One with pale fur and wide red eyes. They were huddled in the corner. Shackles on their wrists. Marks on their faces. They looked at him with fear and confusion. He lowered his weapon and stepped inside slowly. "You're safe now. I'm taking you out of here." They did not move at first. Then the silver girl stood slowly. Her eyes locked with his. "Are you one of them?" "No," he said. "I am not one of anyone anymore." And with that he picked up the nearest chain and broke it free. One link at a time he freed them. One soul at a time he brought them out of the dark. The slaver ship drifted silently as Garen led them back through the tunnel. The stars above watched without speaking. And for the first time in many years, Garen felt something warm begin to stir inside his chest. He did not know what it was yet. But he knew it was worth fighting for. Ship drifted far from known space now, lost behind clouds of dust and broken satellites. Inside its metal walls, the silence had changed. Once cold and lifeless, now it held the soft breathing of rescued souls and the steady steps of the man who had saved them. Garen moved through the narrow halls without speaking. The 3 alien girls followed him with quiet steps. They stayed close to each other, still unsure if this new freedom was real or just another trick. Their eyes searched the walls and corners. As if expecting guards to appear at any moment, he led them into a warm room filled with tools, old machines, and folded blankets. It was not clean and bright like the slave ships of the buyers, but it had something better. It had no cages, no locks, no voices shouting orders. The walls were scratched, but they were safe walls. The light was low, but it did not hurt there. Eyes. Garen picked up a folded blanket and handed it to the silver-skinned girl without saying anything. She hesitated, then slowly took it from his hands. Her fingers brushed against his, and she looked into his face with a cautious stare. He turned away without speaking and moved to a small panel where he adjusted the air levels. The ship hummed around them like a sleeping beast. It was clear this place was old. Everything was worn from years of use. But it worked. And that was enough. The girl with red eyes sat down against the wall and rested her head on her knees. Her fur was matted and dirty from long days in chains. The scaled girl sat beside her and gently held her hand. They did not speak, but their silence spoke of shared pain. They had spent too long locked away, treated like cargo, voices ignored, bodies bruised, names forgotten. After some time, the silver girl stood and walked toward Garen. She looked at the worn symbols on his armor and the deep lines on his face. Her voice was soft but steady. "Why did you help us?" Garen looked at her for a moment before answering. His voice was slow, like the grinding of old gears. "I was tired of watching good people suffer." She looked at him again and then sat down beside the others. For a long while no one spoke. The hum of the ship filled the silence, a rhythm that seemed almost kind. Garen returned to the pilot chair and began plotting a course to a system he knew had a hidden supply post. Not a government one, not part of any alliance. Just a quiet station run by exiles like himself. People who asked no questions, but offered fuel and repairs for a fair trade. The ship moved through space like a ghost. The stars passed by outside, blinking like watchful eyes. Inside, the girls slept for the first time without fear of being woken by pain. Garen sat in the pilot's seat with his eyes open and his hands still. He did not sleep. He rarely did anymore. His mind stayed busy with thoughts he did not want. He remembered the wars, the burning cities, the friends left behind. He remembered the faces of children he could not save now. He had saved 3. It was not enough to fix the past. But it was something when morning came, if morning could even exist in deep space. The girls woke one by one. The red-eyed girl was the first to rise. She moved through the room slowly, watching everything with care. She found the small sink and cleaned her face with the water there. When she looked up, she caught a glimpse of her own reflection. She touched her cheek as if surprised to still be alive. Garen entered the room and set down some food. It was basic and dry but warm. The girls ate in silence at first. Then the scaled girl spoke. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "My name is Kale." She looked at the others. The silver one nodded. "I am Leary." The red-eyed one did not speak right away, but after a moment, she said. Moira. Garen nodded slowly. Names mattered. They had not used them in a long time. The slavers did not ask. The buyers did not care. But Garen did. He looked at each of them in turn. I and Garen. They finished their food and sat together, the silence now less heavy than before. The fear was still there, hiding in their eyes, but it no longer ruled them. They watched Garen move through the ship, fixing wires, checking screens, cleaning parts. He worked with quiet focus, not asking them questions, not demanding thanks later that day. Leary followed him to the engine room. She watched as he repaired a broken panel and replaced a burned-out coil. She asked if she could help. Garen paused, then handed her a tool. She worked beside him in silence. Slowly, carefully, she began to understand the rhythm of the ship, the way he treated it like a living thing. She wondered how long he had been alone here. Too long. She guessed. Kale found a small book among Garen's things. It was old and had pictures of plants from Earth. She flipped through it with care, running her fingers over the drawings. She had never seen trees before, only stone and steel. She showed Mira, who looked at the picture of a river and smiled faintly. It was the first smile she had made in many weeks. That evening, Garen showed them the stars from the viewing room. The wide window revealed a stretch of space filled with light and color. Nebulas danced in the dark like sleeping giants. Leary stood beside him and asked what this place was. He said it had no name. Just another place forgotten by maps and rulers. She asked if he liked it. He said no, but it was quiet. She looked at him for a long time. "You were a soldier once." "I can see it in your eyes." Garen nodded. "A long time ago." "Before everything broke, did you lose someone?" Yes. She did not ask more. She understood loss. They all did. As the stars shifted outside, the 4 of them sat in the quiet room. No chains, no guards, no fear. Just space and stillness, and the slow return of something none of them had dared to feel for a long time: hope. Stars outside moved slowly like waves of light in a quiet sea, and inside the old ship something had begun to change. Something small but powerful, something that could not be seen by machines or tracked on screens, but could be felt in the way. The air seemed warmer, and in the way silence no longer felt so empty. Garen had not meant to form a bond. He had only meant to rescue them, and then take them somewhere safe, perhaps leave them on a quiet planet, where they could start over, far from war and far from slavers. But each day that passed made that plan feel distant, like a voice calling from another lifetime. Leary walked through the ship with steady steps, her silver skin glowing faintly under the soft lights. Her eyes often glanced at Garen, not with fear as before, but with quiet curiosity. She wanted to understand this man who had come from nowhere and given them freedom without asking for anything in return. Kale spent more time near the engines watching how Garen worked, listening to the soft sound of gears turning in circuits humming. She asked questions, and he answered with few words, but enough for her to learn. She was quick with her hands, careful with every tool she touched, as if each part of the ship deserved respect. Mira rarely spoke, but her eyes followed everything. Her red gaze missed nothing. She began to clean the rooms, folding old blankets, brushing away dust, fixing small things that had been broken for years. No one asked her to, but she did it anyway, and Garen noticed, even if he never said a word. One evening, Garen sat alone in the control room, looking out at a dying star in the distance, its light flickering weakly through the blackness behind him. Soft footsteps came and stopped. Leary stood there, quiet, but waiting. He nodded without looking, and she stepped forward. She said she had never seen a human like him, not in the slave stations, not in the markets. Most humans who came to those places only brought pain. They bought lives. They ignored suffering. They called her and others things, not people. But Garen was different. He did not answer. Right away, his hand rested on the console, fingers unmoving. His voice, when it came, was low and rough. He said once he believed in something. Once he thought war had meaning. He fought because he thought it would protect the weak, but in the end all it brought was loss. The people he saved died anyway. The worlds he helped fell later, and the peace he fought for never lasted. Leary sat beside him, her voice gentle. She said she and the others had no home left. Their worlds were sold, their names erased. They were just numbers, an assistant that never cared. But when Garen opened that cargo door and looked at them, not like slaves, not like cargo, but like people, it brought something back inside them, something they thought was lost forever. Garen looked at her for a long time and said, maybe saving one life was still worth something, even if the rest of the galaxy had gone dark. In the following days, the ship became more than a machine. It became a place of healing. Garen taught Kale how to reroute power through damaged conduits. He showed Mira how to scan for nearby systems without triggering old security nets. Leary joined him in the control room, learning how to chart safe paths through lawless space. Laughed sometimes, small quiet moments that came from nowhere, when Mira spilled a water container and slipped, or when Kale tried to fix a panel and it sparked in her face and she shouted in 3 different languages. Garen even smiled once, though it vanished quickly, like it had surprised him as much as them. One night, Leary found a small metal box tucked behind old supplies. Inside were pictures, not digital, but real paper ones, faded with age. A young woman smiling, a child sitting on someone's shoulders, a group of soldiers standing beside a ruined wall, their faces proud but tired. Leary showed the others, and they sat together looking through the images. None of them spoke at first, but then Garen entered the room and froze for a moment when he saw what they held. Instead of anger, he simply sat down beside them and told them the names of the people in the photos, where the pictures were taken, and what happened after. His voice never broke, but there was pain deep inside it, and they listened not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They understood loss and silence, and the way a single memory could weigh more than a planet. Later, when the ship was quiet again and the others slept, Leary stayed awake. She looked at the stars through the window, her thoughts full and her heart restless. She thought of Garen's voice and the way he looked at nothing. When he spoke of the past, she thought of how he had risked everything to rescue them, not because he had orders or a reward, but because he still had something inside him that refused to look away. She wondered what that something was. Maybe it was love, not like the kind in old stories with music and kisses, but a kind made of action and pain and kindness. Without reason, maybe it was something deeper, the kind of love that rises from shared hurt and shared survival. When she finally closed her eyes, she dreamed not of chains or cages, but of flying through endless stars, with no one chasing them, no one owning them, just freedom and fire in the sound of Garen's voice telling stories of a world they had never seen. The next morning, Garen found Mira sitting at the come, she had found an old signal alert blinking a warning, a brief message half lost in static. Garen took the controls and read it carefully, then stood in silence, his face cold again the way it had been when they first met. Kale asked what it was, and Garen said it was a tracking signal sent by the slaver ship before it was destroyed. Someone had received it. Someone was coming. Myra asked how long, and Garen said not long enough. The light in the room dimmed as if the ship itself had heard the news. But no one panicked. They had come too far to fall back into fear. Instead, they moved to their stations, cleaned the weapons, checked the engines, prepared the ship for whatever was coming, and as they worked together, something strong grew between them. Not just survival, not just escape, but something like trust, and maybe even something more. They were not alone anymore, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The silence in the ship had changed again. It was no longer soft or peaceful. Now it carried weight, a kind of pressure that built in the air and wrapped around every corner of the narrow halls. The message they had received was clear. Someone had picked up the distress signal from the slaver ship, and someone was coming to find them. Stood near the center console, staring at the glowing map lines of space routes pulsing on the screen. His arms were crossed, his face calm, but his eyes sharp like old blades that never forgot how to cut. Behind him, the girls stood, quietly waiting for his decision. They had trusted him this far, and now they would follow him wherever he led. Turned and spoke slowly. There are 3 small moons not far from here. One of them has a deep crater that can hide us for a while, maybe even long enough to plan a defense. But if we stay too long, they will track the power output of our systems. They always do. They do not stop once they mark a ship as a target. Kill asked if they could just run. He shook his head. Not with this ship. Not fast enough. And not when they know what we carry. They would chase us across systems and bring more with them. Every time they would not stop just because we fled. Leary stepped forward, her voice steady. We will not run. We will stand. We are not slaves anymore. We are not afraid of chains. Myra nodded quietly. She walked to the weapons console and started checking power levels and charge packs. Her movements were calm and focused, like someone who had made up her mind. Garen looked at all 3 of them and said, if we fight together. But this ship was not built for war, not anymore. It can take a hit or two, but if they send gunships, we will not last unless we use the terrain to our advantage. He plotted a course for the crater moon and set the ship on a silent approach. The engines cooled to minimum thrust, and the lights inside dimmed to avoid detection from long-range sensors. The girls helped prepare the ship. Mira reinforced the hull with heat dampeners. Kale rewired emergency power routes. Leary checked the old turret system and reloaded the energy cells. Hours passed, and then the ship landed smoothly within the crater walls. High cliffs surrounded them, giving cover from scanners and snipers. The sky above was dark and clouded, hiding the stars and wrapping the land in shadows. Garen handed each of the girls a communicator and small sidearm. He gave them short lessons in cover movement and fallback positions. He did not speak like a teacher. He spoke like someone preparing them for the worst, because he had seen the worst, and he knew how fast it could come. As they waited, Mira sat beside a small panel, watching the silent sky through a narrow view screen. Kale leaned against the wall, sharpening a metal shard she had shaped into a blade. Leary walked the hallways, touching the walls, breathing slowly, like someone trying to prepare not just their body but their heart. Then it came, a faint sound in the sky, like a whisper growing louder. The scanner blinked once, then again, then stayed lit. Garen stood and said, 1 ship, maybe more behind it. The others joined him and took their positions. The enemy vessel came down fast, a black shadow cutting through the clouds, its engines glowing cold blue. It hovered above the crater, then descended slowly, scanning the area as it dropped its legs to the ground. Garen watched through the view screen and saw the markings. He remembered those symbols. Mercenaries from the black sectors. They worked for coin, not cause, and they were good at hunting. First squad stepped out, armored and armed with rifles and sensor drones. They moved like a machine, covering each other as they spread out, searching for the hidden ship. Garen activated the turret system that rose from the crater edge and fired a warning shot just enough to scatter them. He shouted, "Hold fire until they are in range. Do not waste charges." The mercenaries responded fast. One of them threw signal flare that lit up the crater with red light. Another fired at the turret, trying to locate its core. Kale and Mira moved to the side vents, using narrow tunnels to flank from the left. Leary stayed near Garen, watching the scanner for movement patterns. They had no army, no backup, just an old soldier and 3 girls who had once been slaves, now standing on ground they chose for themselves. First wave broke through the outer line, but Kale struck from behind with a sharp attack, disabling one and drawing fire. Mira used a flash charge to blind 2 more and pulled back fast, avoiding return fire. Garen took the center line, firing steady bursts from his pulse rifle. Each shot clean and focused. His body moved with practiced strength, his eyes tracking every shadow. One mercenary broke through and reached the ship door. Leary met him with a stun blast aimed right at his chest. He dropped hard and rolled over, gasping before going still. Fight lasted less than 20 minutes, but it felt like hours when the final shot rang and silence returned. The crater was filled with smoke and the sharp scent of burned metal. The girls stood together near the ship, weapons low, but still ready, their bodies tense but unbroken. Garen moved to the fallen mercs and checked each one alive but unconscious. He did not kill because he did not want to become like those they fought against. He disabled their ship with a single core overload and then pulled back. They would wake up in a few hours alone, stranded, and without comes Garen, and the girls would be long gone by then. Back inside the ship, they sat around the main chamber, breathing slowly, not speaking at first. Then Mira laughed, a small short laugh, but real. Kale smiled and looked at her hands. Leary leaned back against the wall, her eyes soft and tired, but full of something new. Garen looked at all 3 and saw something stronger than any armor, something more powerful than any weapon. He saw freedom, not the kind that comes from escape, but the kind that grows from standing tall and saying no more. He spoke quietly. "You fought like soldiers today, better than most. I've known, and you did it not for war, not for revenge, but for each other." Leary stood and stepped close to him. She placed her hand on his chest, not to stop him, not to ask for anything, just to remind him he was not alone anymore. The ship powered up again and left the crater moon behind, moving slowly through the dust and stars toward whatever waited next. They did not speak of what almost happened. They did not need to. The fire had passed, but its warmth remained between them, like a bond forged in silence and shielded by trust. Ship moved through the quiet stretch of space like a drifting memory, a whisper among stars that had seen war and peace and everything between. Inside the old vessel, the air had shifted, no longer filled with fear or silence. It now carried a sense of something waiting, not danger, but possibility, like the start of a path that had never been walked before. Garen stood at the front panel, watching the system map slowly spin. The battle on the crater moon was behind them, but the echo of it still lived in his bones, not as pain this time, but as something else. Something he could not name. A part of him had stayed frozen for many years, since the war, since the loss, since the moment he had chosen silence over purpose. But now he felt the ice melting, not with fire, but with presence, with warmth that came from the small things, the sound of laughter, the quiet moments, the way someone said his name without fear. Leary stepped into the room and looked at the map with him, her silver eyes reflecting the faint lights from the screen. She asked where they would go next, and Garen answered, "Anywhere." The galaxy forgot anywhere. People were left to suffer with no one to help. She nodded once and said then that would be their purpose. Now they had nothing to prove and no flags to follow, but they had eyes to see and hands to lift and hearts that refused to be cold. Kale had repaired the outer panels with patience and skill, using scrap from the fallen mercenary ship. She had learned quickly, her mind sharp, her fingers steady, and her voice had grown more confident over the days. She spoke of building a new engine core, something faster, something better, not just to run, but to reach places others avoided, places that had been marked lost or broken. She said the ship could carry more than them, maybe others who needed safety, maybe more. Voices waiting to be heard. Mira kept the inside running clean and balanced, quiet in words, but strong in presence. She had become the pulse of the crew, the one who noticed every flicker in the power, the one who listened even when no one spoke. She had painted a line of color across one hallway, soft and warm like a river under moonlight. She said it reminded her of a place she once saw in a dream. Before the cages, before the chains. A place where her people lived, near crystal lakes and glowing trees. Garen watched them all with eyes that had once looked only backward. Now they looked forward, not far ahead. Not years into the future, but one day at a time, one task at a time. It was enough, and perhaps that was what healing really was, not forgetting. Not fixing everything, but moving one small step at a time, without letting the past drag every breath into shadow. They arrived near a quiet planet tucked between asteroid belts with no official name. It was a supply point only known to those who lived outside the rules, traders and farmers and former soldiers like Garen, people who had left behind their uniforms and orders and chosen to live simple lives among stars and dust. They landed near a ridge where an old friend of Garen's ran a trade post. The friend was a short man with tired eyes and a missing hand, but his welcome was warm and his supplies fair. He asked nothing about the girls. He only looked once, then gave a small respectful nod and pointed toward the crates they could use while Kale gathered metal and Mira checked tools. Leary walked beside Garen near the edge of a broken cliff, where wind moved like whispers through the dry stone. She looked at him and asked if he ever missed Earth. He said not anymore, not because he had forgotten, but because what he had lost there would not return, and what he had now was here, among the stars, among them. Leary smiled, not with her lips, but with her whole being, something soft and sure in her stance and voice. She said she used to think love was a word only spoken by people who never felt pain, but now she thought maybe real love was born from pain, from rising again, and choosing to stay when it would be easier to leave, choosing to care when it would be safer to turn away. She reached for his hand, and this time he did not pull back. Her fingers were smaller and cooler than his, but the grip was steady and real. They stood like that for a while, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. The bond between them was already written, not in words, but in every risk taken, every wall broken, every moment survived back. On the ship they loaded the new supplies and prepared the vessel for flight. The old engines, now reinforced with new cores and adjusted systems. The panels no longer dented but patched with care, the halls painted with soft marks of color and small symbols left by Myra like pieces of memory hidden in plain sight. When the ship lifted from the surface, the stars welcomed it without question. It was no longer just a tool of escape or a relic of war. It had become something else, a home not made of stone or earth, but of choice and connection. It carried 4 people, bound not by blood or command, but by something stronger, trust forged in the fires of the past and cooled in the quiet of healing. Garen sat in the pilot seat, and for the first time in many years, he felt the weight on his shoulders lighten just enough to breathe freely. He looked at the path ahead and knew it would not be easy, but he also knew he would not walk it alone. While Leary sat beside him, Kale monitored the power. Mira rested with her back against the wall, eyes half closed and peaceful. They did not speak of the past, not because it was gone, but because it had been faced, and now they had chosen to live forward. The stars outside moved again, like slow rivers across a black ocean. The ship followed them with purpose, not to chase glory or revenge, but to find those still waiting in darkness and offer what had once been offered to them, not promises, not commands, but a hand held out and a voice saying, "You are not alone." And in that journey something beautiful had begun, something rare in a galaxy of silence, a story of hope carried by an old human and 3 alien girls, once trapped, now free, once lost, now together. The end.